The November wind cut through Sarah Martinez's thin jacket as she stood outside the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of the folded American flag tucked carefully in her worn leather purse. After 3 buses and 14 hours of travel from her small apartment in Toledo, Ohio, she had finally made it. Sarah worked double shifts at the local diner and cleaned offices at night, just to keep food on the table for her 2 young children. But today was different. Today marked 25 years since her father, Sergeant Miguel Martinez, had died in Vietnam. She had never been able to afford the trip to visit his name on the wall until now. Her calloused fingers traced the edges of the flag that had covered her father's coffin, the same flag she was 7 years old when it was handed to her mother. Now, at 32, she was finally here to honor the man she barely remembered, but had carried in her heart every single day. The memorial stood before her like a black granite mirror, reflecting not just her tired face, but the faces of hundreds of other visitors, families, veterans, tourists, all drawn to this sacred place where 58,000 names told stories of sacrifice and loss. "Excuse me, ma'am," came a stern voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a security guard approaching, his badge catching the afternoon sunlight. "I'm going to need to see your identification and check your bag." Sarah nodded, understanding the security measures. She handed over her driver's license and opened her purse, carefully revealing the folded flag along with her few personal belongings, a crumpled bus ticket, some loose change, and a faded photograph of her father in his uniform. The guard examined her ID with unusual scrutiny, his eyes moving between her face and the license several times. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "I'm sorry, but I can't allow you access to the memorial today." Sarah's heart stopped. "I'm sorry? What? Why not?" "There's an issue with your identification. The address doesn't match our security database, and we've had problems with people using fake IDs to gain access for protest activities." "But this is my real ID," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've traveled all day to get here. My father's name is on this wall." The guard's expression remained unmoved. "I understand your situation, ma'am, but I have my orders. Security has been tightened recently, and I can't make exceptions." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. The exhaustion from her journey, the money she had scraped together, the time she had taken off work without pay, all of it seemed to crumble in that moment. She looked at the wall where her father's name waited, so close yet suddenly unreachable. Other visitors began to notice the commotion. Some stared with curiosity, others with sympathy, but no one intervened. Sarah stood there, clutching the flag that represented everything her father had died for, being denied access to the very memorial built in his honor. "Excuse me, officer." The voice was deep, calm, and carried an authority that made everyone within earshot turn their heads. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah looked up to see a tall African-American man in military dress uniform approaching them. His chest displayed rows of ribbons and medals, and his bearing spoke of years of service and command. He was probably in his early 50s, with graying temples and kind but determined eyes. The security guard straightened slightly, recognizing the military rank. "Sergeant Major, this woman is trying to enter the memorial, but there's an issue with her identification." The soldier, whose name tag read Washington, looked at Sarah with genuine concern. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear. What brings you here today?" Sarah's voice caught in her throat. "My father, Sergeant Miguel Martinez. He died in Vietnam 25 years ago today. I've never been able to visit his name on the wall until now." She held up the folded flag with shaking hands. This was his. Sergeant Major Washington's expression softened immediately. He looked at the flag, then at Sarah's worn clothes and tired eyes, understanding immediately the sacrifice she had made just to be here. "Officer," he said, turning back to the guard, "what specifically is the issue with this lady's identification?" "The address doesn't match our security database. We've had incidents with protesters using fake IDs." Washington examined Sarah's driver's license. then looked at her face with the trained eye of someone who had seen real grief and recognized authentic emotion. "Ma'am, when did you move to this address in Toledo?" "About 6 months ago," Sarah replied. "I had to find cheaper rent after I lost my second job. I updated my license right away." Washington nodded, understanding the situation perfectly. He had seen enough military families struggle financially to know that frequently changing addresses due to economic hardship was common, especially for survivors of fallen soldiers. "Officer," Washington said, his voice taking on a tone of quiet authority, "I've been coming to this memorial for 15 years. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. I know what sacrifice looks like, and I know what grief looks like." He gestured toward Sarah. "This woman has traveled hundreds of miles on what I'm guessing was her last dollar to honor her father's memory. Her identification is legitimate. Sometimes our security databases don't update as quickly as people's lives change." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "Sergeant Major, I understand, but I have my orders." "Your orders are to maintain security while allowing Americans to honor their fallen heroes," Washington interrupted firmly, but respectfully. "This woman's father died serving this country. She has every right to be here." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the respectful but firm exchange. Among them were other veterans, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of former military. They began to understand what was happening, and several stepped closer in a show of silent support. Sergeant Major Washington could see the security guard was caught between his training and the growing pressure of the situation. Rather than escalate, he took a different approach. "Officer, what's your name?" he asked kindly. "Johnson, sir." "Johnson, have you ever served in the military?" "No, sir, but my brother did 2 tours in Iraq." Washington nodded. "Then you understand what military families go through, the financial struggles, the moves, the paperwork that never seems to catch up with real life." He gestured toward Sarah, who stood quietly, tears streaming down her face. "This woman probably saved for months just to afford the bus ticket here. She's not a protester or a security threat. She's a daughter trying to honor her father." Officer Johnson looked at Sarah again, really seeing her for the first time. Her worn but clean clothes, her carefully maintained dignity despite her obvious exhaustion, the way she held that flag like it was the most precious thing in the world. Johnson hesitated, the weight of the situation settling on him. "I suppose I could call my supervisor for clarification on the database issue." "That would be appropriate," Washington agreed. "In the meantime, I'd be honored to escort Mrs. Martinez to her father's name on the wall. I take full responsibility for her presence here." One of the veterans in the growing crowd stepped forward. "I'll vouch for her, too," said an elderly man with a Vietnam veteran cap. "I was there. I know what we fought for, and it wasn't so that a soldier's daughter would be turned away from honoring her father." Another voice joined in. "She has every right to be here." Then another. "This is exactly why we have this memorial." Officer Johnson found himself surrounded not by an angry mob, but by a group of Americans, veterans and civilians alike, united in their belief that Sarah belonged here. The weight of their quiet dignity and shared understanding was more powerful than any argument or threat could have been. "Mrs. Martinez," Johnson said finally, his voice softer now, "I apologize for the confusion. While I verify the database issue, please go ahead and visit your father's memorial. Sergeant Major Washington, thank you for your help in resolving this situation." Sarah looked up at Washington with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know your first name." "James," he replied with a gentle smile. "And it's my honor, ma'am. Let's go find your father." Walking toward the wall, Sarah felt her legs grow weak. The black granite stretched before them, reflecting the late afternoon sky and the faces of visitors who moved along its length like pilgrims on a sacred journey. "Do you know what panel his name is on?" James Washington asked gently. Sarah pulled out a crumpled piece of paper she had printed from a library computer weeks ago. "Panel 32E, line 47. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the section. Sarah's eyes scanned the names, each one representing a life cut short, a family forever changed. Then she saw it. Martinez, Miguel A. Her knees buckled slightly, and James gently steadied her arm. "Take your time," he said softly. Sarah reached out and touched her father's name with trembling fingers. The stone was cold but somehow comforting, solid and permanent, in a way that made his sacrifice feel real and honored. "Tell me about him," James said, standing respectfully beside her. "I was so young when he died," Sarah began, her voice barely audible. "But my mother told me stories. He loved baseball, wanted to be a teacher when he got back. He wrote letters about the friends he made in his unit, how they looked out for each other." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Mom said he died pulling 2 wounded soldiers to safety." James nodded, understanding the weight of that sacrifice. "He sounds like a good soldier and a good man." Sarah carefully unfolded the flag and held it against the wall, below her father's name. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. The flag he had died defending now returned to honor his memory. "I brought this for him," she said. "I wanted him to know that even though I never really knew him, he's been with me my whole life. Every time I struggled, every time I wanted to give up, I thought about what he sacrificed for me to have the freedom to struggle, to work, to raise my children in peace." Other visitors had noticed what was happening and gave them space, but several veterans approached quietly to pay their respects. An elderly woman touched Sarah's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for honoring him." A young soldier in uniform saluted silently. Officer Johnson appeared at the edge of the gathering, no longer as security, but as a witness to something profound. He had called his supervisor and learned that the database issue was indeed a common problem with recent address changes. But more importantly, he had learned something about the real meaning of the memorial he was supposed to protect. "Mrs. Martinez," James said after they had stood in quiet reflection for several minutes, "I want you to know something. What happened today with the security issue, that wasn't about you or your father or your right to be here. Sometimes systems fail us, but people don't have to." Sarah looked at him with deep gratitude. "You didn't have to help me. You don't even know me." "That's where you're wrong," James replied. "I know exactly who you are. You're the daughter of a soldier who died for his country. You're a mother working multiple jobs to provide for her children. You're an American who traveled hundreds of miles to honor your father's sacrifice. I know you because your father and I wore the same uniform, swore the same oath." He paused, looking at the wall that held so many names. "And I know you because 25 years ago, when your father died, he was serving alongside soldiers who looked like me, black and white, Latino and Asian. We all bled the same color for the same flag." The memorial isn't just about honoring the dead. It's about remembering that our differences make us stronger when we stand together. Sarah understood. The incident with security hadn't been about race directly, but James Washington had seen someone in need and stepped forward, not because they shared the same background, but because they shared the same values, the same reverence for sacrifice, the same understanding of what it meant to be American. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the memorial, Sarah folded the flag carefully and prepared to leave. But she wasn't leaving alone. James had given her his contact information and insisted she call if she ever needed anything. Officer Johnson had apologized personally and ensured that the database would be updated to prevent similar incidents. More importantly, she was leaving with the knowledge that her father's sacrifice had created a country where strangers could become allies in moments of need, where differences in background could be overcome by shared humanity and mutual respect. The long bus ride home to Toledo would be easier now. She had found her father's name on the wall, yes, but she had also found something she hadn't expected, proof that the values he died defending, equality, justice, and the belief that Americans look out for each other, were still alive in people like James Washington, and even in the security guard who had learned to look beyond protocol to see the person behind the policy. As she walked away from the memorial, Sarah turned back one last time to see James standing at attention, saluting the wall. In that moment, she understood that her father's legacy lived on not just in her memory, but in every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, and every time one American helped another simply because it was the right thing to do. The memorial had given her more than a place to grieve. It had shown her a vision of the America her father had died to protect, an America where people of all backgrounds could stand together in honor of shared sacrifice and common humanity.